Am I audible? Namami Dhanvantarim Adidevam Surasurahi Vandita Padapadman Loke Jararu Bhayamrityunasham Dataramesham Vividaushadinam. Okay, so we're gonna look at the introduction to Ahara. So we're basically going to learn about what Ayurvedic nutrition is and how is it different from Western nutrition, and what are the points to keep in mind when you have a client and you want to give them a diet or a pathya. What are the basic things that you need to keep in mind? So to begin with, um, if any of you have your microphones turned on, could you please turn it off? Thank you. So we're going to start with what ahara is and some basic, some basic important constituents that Ayurvedic ahara consists of, like how Mahabhutas are connected with ahara, how we give a lot of importance to the six rasas in ahara, and how ahara is one of the most important pillars of good health. And we're going to look at a lot of examples, and we're going to study about the concept of prana in ahara. So we've basically, when you talk about prana, you talk about life, you talk about the oxygen that you inhale, you talk about that basic amsha of life that is present within you. But here we're going to talk about the prana that the food that we eat has, and how we need to ensure that we preserve the prana of food, and how we should ensure that we consume food that is rich in prana. And we're just going to look at how the three doshas affect, how food can balance these three doshas, and how the three doshas come into picture with rasas, with mahabhutas, and so on, right? So here you're going to see these terms: ahara, which is just food that you eat. Um, See, the only thing that you have to understand is, in Ayurveda, when we talk about ahara, it's not just it's not just putting together a few ingredients and producing a dish that just tastes good. But we need to understand that this ahara has to be beneficial to your body. It has to ensure that it doesn't imbalance your doshas. It has to nourish you physically, mentally, and spiritually. So that becomes important. And we have different kinds of ahara, like what you drink, what you eat, what you can lick, what you can chew. Different kinds of things come together, and we in Ayurveda just call the entire thing as ahara. Then you'll come across this term viruddha ahara when you learn about causes for imbalance of disease, or causes when your agni is impaired, or when you have armor, or any kind of an imbalance. You will come across this term viruddha, which just refers to anything that is incompatible. So having two different kinds of food that don't go together, that can become viruddha, that can become toxic to your body. Similarly, when you have sometimes you have food that can kind of affect the other food. Like if you have milk, and along with milk, if you have something that's citrus, that citrus can spoil this milk, and that can lead to an imbalance in doshas. The time of the day, the seasons, the location, and all of that can affect your doshas. And if the food that you have does harm to you, and it creates an imbalance because two constituents of that food don't go together, then that we call as viruddhahara in Ayurveda. The next thing is shad rasas, which shad means six, and rasas mean the six different tastes that are present. So you have sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent tastes. And in general, for you to have a balanced diet, you need to ensure that you have all these 6 rasas in your food. If you incorporate all these 6 tastes, then that is considered to be the healthiest balanced diet for you. Then prana, which is your vitality, and ojas, which is your immunity, the basic essence of all your dhatus. Nidra is sleep, and brahmacharyam, sexual restraint. So these are certain terms that you might come across in this presentation, or in the future when we talk about ahara. So to begin with, ahara is one of the 3 pillars of health and well-being. The other 2 being nidra, which is sleep, and brahmacharyam, which is celibacy. So why is ahara so important? Ahara at the right time, in the right amount, is like is like amrit to you. Is like something that's divine. And it's something that you need for your body to grow, for you to maintain your doshas, for you to have a healthy body with healthy dhatus, for you to have strength, for you to maintain your health, for you to ensure that when you have healthy progeny, and basically for your life, for your prana. Now, if this ahara is not the right kind of food, you have it at the wrong time of the day, you have wrong amounts of food, like you have too much of your ahara, you have too little ahara, then that can lead to an imbalance of your vata, pitta, and your kapha doshas. Depending on the food, depending on the quantity, the doshas will vary, right? So basically, we have 3 types of ahara: plant-based ahara, animal-based ahara, and mineral-based ahara. So plant-based would include gums, resins, plants, fruits, roots, stems, vegetables, flowers, and so on. Animal-based would include products that you get from animals like honey, milk, and so on. And minerals would include your salts, minerals from the sea, seaweed, and so on. So basically, ahara is divided into these 3 factors. Now, based on the elements, based on the Mahabhuta predominance, ahara, there are 5 Mahabhutas, 5 elements, which are earth, water, fire, air, and space. Now, you know that your doshas are a combination of these Mahabhutas, right? So when we say a particular food is rich in a particular Mahabhuta, it indirectly means that that Mahabhuta is kind of going to help pacify or increase, or help with that particular dosha, right? Now, earth dominant aharas that have earth element in it would include wheat, milk, sweet potatoes, most of your your root vegetables, beans, rice, your seeds, nuts, yam, and animal based food. That is, so these things are basically heavier, and they have that, they have qualities of the earth Mahabhuta in them. Water dominant would be your fruits and vegetables that have a lot of water content, like watermelon, cucumber, your pumpkins, and so on. Coconut water, your dairy products, most of your juicy fruits, tomatoes, grapes, all that would have what would be water dominant ahara. The next thing is fire dominant. So fire would include pepper, hot sauce, black pepper, cinnamon, alcohol. All that are fire dominant aharas. Air dominant would be raw food, raw dried fruits, raw vegetables, beans, legumes, potatoes, chickpeas, your dal. All that is air dominant. And finally, space dominant ahara would include your sprouts, salads, raw leafy vegetables, your algae, and so on. Now, the important thing here is your rasas are also a combination of these Mahabhutas, and your doshas also are a combination of these Mahabhutas. For instance, if you take Kapha dosha, you will have a combination of earth and water. If you take your Pitta dosha, it would predominantly be the fire element, and your vata dosha would predominantly be the air element. So when there is an imbalance in your fire, in your pitta, you need to ensure, if pitta is very high, you need to ensure that you cut down on food that is hot, that is spicy, and that will increase the pitta, like peppers, your hot sauces, things that would increase that fire element, things that have fire element, and things that would increase that pitta because it's hot and it's spicy, right? Similarly, when there is a vata prakopa, for instance, most of the joint pain, back pain, and cases that come to Ayurvedic physicians, because normally when there is an ache or a pain, the first, those are majority of the cases that we Ayurvedic physicians receive, right? So, and Ayurveda has a lot of medicines for that, but along with those medicines, along with your oil application, along with whatever herb you prescribe, it is important to cut down on food that will increase the vata, like your raw food, raw vegetables, your dals, beans, legumes, potatoes. So you need to give up, you need to give them a diet plan so they can follow that and ensure they don't increase the dosha that is otherwise imbalanced in the process, right? So in Western nutrition, there's only one basis of your nutrition, which is carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, the minerals, the nutrition content that's there in the food. But in Ayurveda, we have two concepts, which is pran. Pran is basically the vital force, the life force that is present in the food. So we look at that in detail, but in general, food that is fresh, food that is prepared with love, food that the vegetables, plant-based food is rich in prana. And the reason that I said, I told you about food that's prepared with love is because if you know of people who eat food that is made at home, is cooked at home, is cooked by somebody who's very loving and who wishes you well, like for instance, food that your mother makes, that is rich in prana because it's made with a lot of love, it's made with a lot of goodness. You go to a restaurant and you eat every day food that's made by somebody who doesn't know you. It's like a business, so they put in things to make the food tasty, but that food is not served with love, that food is not prepared with love, and that makes a lot of difference. That is the reason that when you eat food at home, you eat food that is made by your loved ones, you kind of are healthier. The weight that you gain is a healthier weight. You have your dhatu poshaka, you have that nutrition, that nourishment, that's naturally present in that food because it's loaded with pran and it's loaded with a lot of positivity. The next thing is ojas. So only if you have food that is good, that is rich in prana, that is very nutritious, will your dhatus be nourished, will you have a perfect health, and your well-being is good. So that in turn will ensure that your dhatu formation happens perfectly, and the end result of that is your immunity and your strength and vitality, which will be great if your dhatus are all formed well in that sequence, right? So that is your ojas. Now, prana. So prana is the life force energy. It is the reason that a fruit or vegetable emanates a fragrance. It tastes sweet, it's juicy, it has vibrant hues. Certain types of food are filled with prana, so you want to eat more of these foods, like your vegetables, your the healthy food, your plant-based food that's made with a lot of love. Some foods don't have too much prana, they have too little prana, so you would want to avoid these foods. Now, these are some examples, right? So fresh food that is organic, locally grown. Now, why locally grown is important is because if you eat food that is exported from other places, that food is not grown locally. It has to come from another location. So it is plucked, it is preserved, and then that food is sent. And whatever duration of travel that the food has to undergo to reach your location. So in the process, what happens is the food that you get is not fresh. And in order to ensure that the food looks fresh, there are things that are added to that food, and that is not healthy. Now, that is a reason that if you go to some of the Indian stores in the US, you find vegetables that see only in India. Vegetables that are frozen, and and frozen food, for that matter, is found in abundance in different stores across the world. Frozen food has no prana. Frozen food is processed, it is half cooked, and it is frozen, so it has no prana, it isn't fresh. Sometimes, in order to preserve the food longer, there are preservatives that are added to that food, and that in turn is even worse for your body. So there's absolutely no prana in those food that is frozen and that you can cook very easily. You put it in the oven and your food is done. So that is not healthy food. That food lacks prana. uh, Normally what happens is in the US and in certain other places, your vegetables and fruits have a number that's marked on it to let you know whether it is conventionally processed, whether whether it is genetically modified, whether it is organic, and so on. You need to ensure that you buy food that is organic, because that's healthier. Now, sometimes it isn't possible for you to buy food that's organic, and you're forced to buy something that is conventional and that has the amount of pesticides and herbicides that are permitted by the law, that is added to the food, and that food is generally less expensive. And not all your clients would be okay buying organic produce, because it's far more expensive. In case they use food that is conventionally processed with pesticides and herbicides, but that are of the permitted amount, you just have to ensure that they cook the food well and that they use the vegetables a little faster, because these vegetables last longer and they lack prana. They're not filled with prana, but they have very little prana left in them. And try and completely avoid things that are genetically modified, because they're not made naturally. The process is not natural, and what goes into it is all artificial. So that is not good for you at all. So food that is rich in prana is basically food that is plant-based and food that is freshly cooked. Now, food that lacks this prana is food that's processed, food that's canned, food that's frozen, vegetables and fruits that are grown far away and that have to be trucked or transported to your place, leftover food that has been refrigerated for a really long time. So I know a few people who actually make food and store it in the refrigerator. They cook on weekends and they store it and they slowly use the food. The first 2 days, the food isn't really it isn't really bad or spoiled food. But by the time you're towards the end of the week, the food that you've refrigerated so long, it kind of loses its taste. You take it and you heat it, and it isn't fresh food. So that food is not rich in prana. That food has no prana or very, very, very little prana based on what you've cooked and kept. And then there are certain foods that you should not cook and leave in the refrigerator for a very long time. For instance, your green vegetables, leafy vegetables, your spinach. If you cook spinach, you have to consume it the same day, because that's the healthiest way of consuming your spinach. If you leave it in the refrigerator for a very long time, you're kind of draining away all the prana, and that spinach that you then consume after a week or two is not healthy for you. right? And this thing, food that lacks prana, is food that most of the people who work and who don't have time to cook food, they end up having food that has no prana, right? So uh, food that is plant based is has more prana, means it's more healing, it's easier for the body to digest, and basically it has a very positive beneficial energy that the body gets when you eat food that is rich in that is plant based and that's rich in prana. Now food that is animal based is just basically rajasika guna, which means there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of negativity, stress that that surrounds that animal based food. It is more difficult for your body to break down that food, to digest that food, and it has less prana, so it is not very healing to the body as well. Now most of the time when you have these clients who complain of indigestion, or who complain of this really bad agni, vishama agni, or if they have just basic armor that you can feel, you touch the pulse and you can feel, you'll notice that most of these people consume a lot of meat, especially meat that is frozen and that's almost cooked, and they just put it in the oven and they heat that and they have that. That is really bad for your body, especially people who eat a lot of red meat are prone to various diseases. And when you start examining the nadi, you can even feel with a little bit of practice, and if you have the habit of meditating over the nadi, which is something that you will start doing when you start practicing, when because you just examine the nadi, you're just going to feel the three pulses, but when you start meditating on the nadi, you'll get a fair idea about what is wrong with the person, and you'll be able to connect the dots, and you'll be able to find things that probably the client won't be able to explain to you. When you're able to do that, with a little bit of practice, you'll all be able to do that. So when that happens, you can even touch the nadi, and you can feel that when a person has too much of meat, you can feel that in their nadi, you can feel that in their body, right? So in general, plant-based food is better for your heart. It's better for your health, and there have been various studies that have found that most of these coronary diseases, most of the cardiac conditions, are a result of red meat and are a result of eating food that is. It is not just red meat, but also food that is loaded with cheese, that's very fatty, food that is that basically goes and blocks your arteries. And most of the cases, there were people who ate a lot of meat and who ate a lot of red meat. So there are various studies that have been done for this. So even over here, when a person has a cardiac condition and when they go to a doctor with a cardiac condition, the first thing that is recommended is to cut down on the meat intake and to slowly stop the meat intake, and instead switch to a plant-based diet, which kind of improves the circulation, it improves the blood flow, and it reduces the inflammation, and it lowers your risk of heart attacks, strokes, any kind of a blockage in your shrotas and so on. So plant-based food also reduces the risk of metabolic syndromes, of diseases that happen because of unhealthy eating habits, like high blood sugar, high cholesterol, excessive weight gain, even diabetes, both type 1 as well as type 2. Um, Especially for people who have type 2 diabetes, I know somebody who I'd actually met in the US. This guy was about 29 when I met him, and his diet goes thus: he has a cup of coffee in the morning, along with eggs, or along with some form of meat, which could be like chicken nuggets or whatever. This next meal is his lunch, which would he would eat 5 days that he worked. He would eat one day at Chipotle. The second day he would go and eat at some Indian place where he would order just meat, and he wouldn't even eat vegetables like mashed potatoes, or absolutely no vegetables. His vegetable intake was zero, and this was his diet, and he refused to eat food, anything that was remotely plant based, or there was a vegetable in it or whatever. So it was just different forms of meat and a lot of red meat, and he was eating this 3 times a day. And I'm not joking, along with that he drank and he smoked. And when I met him, I in fact told him that he must get his blood routine done, because just seeing him eat would make me feel sick. And I'm not even joking. It would just make me sick, because he would eat just meat and absolutely nothing else, and he would wash that down with a lot of soda. Now this guy goes to the doctor because he had to get his blood routine done, because he was trying to, at work he was trying to switch jobs, and the other company needed a blood routine, so he went and got his blood routine done. And the doctor found out that his hemoglobin was very high, his sugar was very high, his SGPT, SGOT, all his liver function tests were abnormally high, and he had high cholesterol, and his entire lipid profile was way out of order. And the doctor just told him that he needs to stop eating meat, and he needs to have a much better diet. And he was obese, and he was everything that that kind of explains this entire presentation today, and why you must have food that is healthier, and why you must switch to a more plant-based diet. Because this guy had to then stop eating whatever he did eat, had to change his diet, and he found it very difficult to do that, because he was not used to eating vegetables. He started insulin shots. He had to start on statin for his cholesterol, but now he's much better. He's in a better place now. He's cut down on his meat intake. He's started including a little bit of vegetables. And the sad thing is, his mom has to blend the vegetables in a blender and give it to him, because he wouldn't, he won't eat if he saw the vegetables. So, this is like, and this is exactly the presentation today. You need to switch to a plant-based diet, because that will help you lose your weight. That kind of helps to prevent your inflammation, prevent this basic risk of diabetes, cholesterol, obesity, and metabolic disorders, lifestyle disorders, and anything that increases your kapha would be kept under check if you had plant-based food. So now again, when in women who are postmenopausal, in women who are who have PCOD, and who have other menstrual related problems, who have thyroid issues, even for such people who normally have where weight gain happens because of that particular symptom, in such people, plant-based diets can help to lose weight in a healthy way, not that drastic loss of weight. If you have more plant-based food, it reduces your risk of cancer, right? So now, basically, in Western diet, like we've seen before, there's just one pattern of food, that one pattern of diet that is given to everybody. But for us, we have these 3 doshas, vata, pitta, and kapha, and we kind of have to customize our diet based on the client, based on the condition, based on their prakriti and their vikriti. For instance, what I might recommend to a person who is a vata prakriti with a vata vikriti, who has a vata imbalance, will definitely not suit another person who would have a kapha Prakriti and Vikruti, and who would have a kapha imbalance, right? So we need to customize our nutrition. We need to customize the diet based on the person, based on the doshas, and also based on their basic activities, like based on their routine. Now, if I have a Vata person who does a lot of exercise, I need to tell that person to cut down on the exercise and then work. I need to work along with that particular person, and that is the thing with Ayurveda. You can't just have you can't just say, okay, so this is one sheet of paper, and say, okay, so this is the diet and this is what you follow, and you can't hand that over to everybody. You need to have a few different kinds of combinations, and you need to work with each person differently. So now your food should ideally have all these six rasas. If you have a perfectly balanced body, and you have no imbalance in any doshas, you should have food that would ideally have sweet, sour, salty, bitter, pungent, and astringent rasas in them. Now, if you have a vata aggravating kind of prakriti, and any little thing that would remotely increase vata, if that would increase your vata, then you need to ensure that, but you're healthy and you have no other problem. Like, for instance, if you're the kind of person who is a vata prakriti, and when you have like certain berries, or you have certain like for instance you have potatoes, then you have this real discomfort and bloated sensation. You need to make sure that you cut down on those particular things that would increase your vata, and you concentrate on eating other things and supplement that, right? Does that make sense? So for instance, if you're basically a kapha prakriti, you can include sweet food in your diet. Like, you can have you can have some amount of dairy, some amount of fruits that are sweet, and so on. But you cut down on the excessive intake of sweet, like sweets or chocolates, or indulging in a lot of desserts, because basically you have that prakriti of increasing your kapha. So that is important, but that doesn't mean you completely cut down on sweet food. Instead, you have things like fruits, dates, dairy, which are not direct sugar, but they're an indirect form of sweet, right? Does that make sense? uh, Now, this is something that you have to keep in mind when you have a client who doesn't have a really who doesn't have a very serious condition, and it's just they're just coming to you for something like something like, say, weight loss. They're coming to you with just for general fitness or something like that. So for them, you need to ensure that just based on their prakriti, you're able to give them a diet where you're able to incorporate all the six rasas, but you must know where to balance it out. So some examples of sweet rasas would be cooked apples, dates, beets, ghee, milk, sugarcane, grapes, and so on. Sour rasa would be your sour cream, your citrus fruits, tamarind, yogurt that is left out, and that is that turns sour. Um, Gooseberries, these are all examples of sour food. Salty food would include your different salts that are there, nuts, seeds, seaweed, and so on. Bitter food would include leafy greens like spinach, kale, bitter gourd, neem, sandalwood. All that is bitter food. The next one is pungent food. Pungent food would include onions, garlic, things like asafoetida, black pepper, ginger. That food that has that strong pungent taste that comes across. That's a pungent food. And finally, astringent food would include dried fruits, berries, legumes, unripe bananas, raw fruits. All that would be astringent food. Right? Now, the importance of this rasa is some of these rasas increase some of the doshas, and the others help balance the dosha. So, knowing what increases and what decreases. Somebody has the microphone turned on again. Can you please mute yourself? So the importance of knowing these rasas is based on your body constitution, based on the doshas. Um, one rasa will, be beneficial to one dosha, but it might lead to an imbalance of another dosha. For instance, if you take Madhura rasa, sweet food, that will help to balance out your vata dosha, but that would increase your kapha dosha. So you need to know these rasas so you can accordingly prescribe herbs as well as food for a client. So basically, vata dosha, the rasas that are beneficial are sweet, sour, and salty rasas, and bitter, pungent, and astringent rasa would increase the vata. So for a person who is vata prakriti, you need to tell them as part of their diet, they need to cut down on the bitter, astringent, and pungent food that they have, especially the bitter and the astringent food that they have. That would increase the vata. Now, if they are healthy, you tell them to reduce the amount of bitter and astringent rasa. If they have a vata vikara, and if there is an imbalance in vata that needs to be addressed with medicines and with herbs, then you ask them to cut down on these rasas that would increase vata, and you give them rasas that would decrease vata, like sweet, sour, salty rasas that would help decrease vata. For pitta, the rasas that will help balance out pitta is your sweet, bitter, and astringent rasa. And rasas that would increase pitta would be sour, pungent, and salty rasa, but excessively the sour and pungent rasas. So for people who are more prone to acidity, who are more prone to pitta vikaras, or even for people who are prone to bleeding disorders, you need to cut down on the sour and pungent and salty food that they take, because that can lead to an increase in pitta and rakta. Finally, for kapha, the beneficial rasas would be astringent and bitter and pungent rasa. They would help balance out kapha, and the harmful rasas would be sweet, salty, and sour rasas, which would increase kapha. Now, this should be like a mantra for you, where you must know what rasa increases what dosha. If you can make like a little chart or a table, or like a tabular column or something, and just have notes. This is something that's important, and this is something that you should give a lot of importance to, because if you suddenly have a doubt about and what increases, what decreases, and that becomes a problem. You need to be sure about this. When we learned it with a shloka from Ashtanga Hridaya, which is very easy to remember. So we just basically learned these rasas in one particular order, which was sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent. That was the order that we learned. And we learned that the first three help reduce vata, and the last three help reduce kapha. And the bitter, astringent, and sweet rasas help reduce pitta. So the pitta rasa, only those three rasas we had to remember. The other three, it was very easy. The first three will balance vata, and the last three will balance kapha. If you can remember the order and learn, then that will that's one way of learning it. I'll write down the order. If that helps some of you, you can probably use that. Otherwise, if you have any other way of remembering it, use that also. If you remember this order, SSSPBA, if you remember that order, then is no, it's not. It is not. So pungent rasa increases vata. It helps to decrease pitta, and it also increases it helps to decrease kapha, and it also increases your pitta. It is not tridoshik. And too much of pungent, when it's very strong and when it's very pungent, the dosha that it increases the most is pitta dosha. Right. So now when you have, so in Ayurveda, we don't have this rasa called spicy. Instead, what we have that's closest to spicy is actually, is actually pungent and something that's very hot. So that would be your spicy rasa. There isn't a direct, direct rasa that translates as spicy. It's a combination of pungent and hot. So anything that is pungent and hot, that would increase your pitta. So it's like a combination that you have. So for your Western, you just have a nutrition, you have this nutrition slip on every food that you have, with how much of carbohydrates, fats, protein, cholesterol, sugar, and so on. You just have, this is how Western nutrition is, right? So here what we do not consider is, the labels don't really tell you whether it is organically produced, whether there's prana, whether your doshas are, how your doshas are going to be affected, and so on. In Ayurveda, every food that you take, every vegetable, every fruit, every ingredient that you take would have a rasa, which is the taste, would have a guna, which are qualities. It would have a potency. It would either be heating or cooling. It would have an aftertaste, and you'll know whether it's an animal based or a plant based protein, and you'll know the level of prana, right? Whether you have a lot of prana or no. So that is how Ayurvedic nutrition works. It's a lot more wholesome, because you're giving a lot of importance to to everything um, that has to go into consideration when you're making food. Now, actually, there's a patient of mine who is about 35 years old, and he's highly diabetic. He's obese. He's a vegetarian. He's obese and he's highly diabetic because he has absolutely no exercise. He has absolutely, he has a lot of stress at work as well as at home. He got married, and he has a few problems at home and as well as at work. He's basically very stressed out, and his way of beating this stress is eating too much of food, especially food that's sweet. So even after he was diagnosed with diabetes, he continued eating food that he felt was okay for him. And along with that, he also has a spondylitic condition, and he used to have rheumatoid arthritis, and that was what he came to us for treatment for, his rheumatoid arthritis. So we brought that under control, and then he had to bring his sugar under control. But recently, he's doing fine as far as his pain and his joints and everything is concerned. He hasn't had an arthritic attack since then. But recently, his sugar levels elevated a lot, and his HbA1c almost hit 9.6, which is way too high. And they took him to this doctor, to a modern doctor, but somebody who practices a different kind of a different kind of treatment, where he doesn't give medicines, but he tries to bring the condition under control using food. But the thing is, he uses the same diet plan for every patient of his. So this man and his mother are diabetic, but the mother isn't as bad as the son. And he gave them a food chart, which is basically the same food plan. And the mother was doing perfectly fine with it, because they're basically starving. They're not eating anything. And that's the way you lose weight, and your sugar comes under control. So they're basically starving. And what happened is, that kind of helped the mother, because she was on medication, and she doesn't eat too much food. But this boy who's used to eating a lot of food, he didn't take that treatment very well, and he started having low sugar. His sugar started dropping, and he started having an hypoglycemic attack, right? So this is something that we don't do in Ayurveda. We don't have one chart that we just hand out to every patient that comes to you, because you need to work based on their body, based on what they do and what not. See, so this is exactly how your Western nutrition works. You tell them that they can have this much carbohydrates, this much vegetables, this much protein, and this much dairy, and this is what goes into your plate. But in Ayurveda, this is actually a very nice. This is a very nice my plate that's customized by one of the students. I'm not too sure who, but it's a very beautifully done thing. So what I was going to suggest is, for people who want to have, it's always nice to have this little chart that you can hand out to your client, and you can tell them that this is what you want. But we can't do that. We can't have just one particular thing. So what you can do is you can work out a diet plan for a person who's only vata, for a person who's vata, who's only pitta, who's only kapha, and then you can work out one for a person who's vata pitta, pitta kapha, or kapha vata, and then you have to work out one for a person who's tridoshik. So you'll totally have seven plans that you can have for food. If you want to hand out something to somebody, you can have a customized my plate, but you'll have to have 7 of them, because that is how our doshas are, that's how the prakriti is going to work. And when you give it out to a client, please be sure, suppose if it's a pitta if it's a pitta kapha person, and that person but you look at this chart and you feel there's something that person that doesn't suit that person. For instance, if that person is allergic to, say, apples, you need to make sure that you've cut that out from the chart. Does that make any sense to you guys? So it becomes easier for you, because you have like an hour, or you have 90 minutes to spend with your client, and you need to do a lot of things in this 1 hour or 90 minutes that you've given the client. So if you have something like that, it becomes easier, because otherwise you have to sit and explain everything, and they might forget, and it might take a lot of time. But even when you have something like this, just make sure that you add and remove a few things based on their needs. So this would be an easier way for you to so that you don't waste too much of time, and at the same time you've kind of covered everything. What you can do is, you don't have to use the same thing, but what you can do is you can customize it based on your local needs, based on what sort of clients you have, based on vegetables, fruits, and produce that is commonly found in your place. You can also have a don't eat part to your my plate, where you say avoid eating this because of your condition. So that's something that you can work on, if when you start practicing. That will save a lot of time. Apart from that, we also give a lot of importance to whether the food is warm, whether the food is cold, whether the food is very dry, whether it's oily, whether it's heavy, whether it would digest easily, whether it makes your mind feel lethargic. There are certain things, like when people who eat a lot of meat, they tend to get angry more faster than people who eat food that is plant-based. Similarly, people who eat food that's very hot, like people who eat a lot of chilies, again, they tend to get angry a little faster. So based on the kind of food that you eat, your mental status would also kind of change. And how when you eat, what the situation is. If you're at work and if you're spending, say, less than 5 minutes to kind of gulp down your food, and that food is not going to be beneficial to you. Are you eating in a place that's very noisy? If you don't concentrate on your food, that can actually lead to an imbalance in doshas. So all these factors also come into play, for us to understand whether a particular person has the kind of digestion that is important, that is right, and based on that you can judge the agni of that particular person, right? So all these factors also are given a lot of importance when we talk about Ayurvedic nutrition. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is, if you have a client who doesn't spend even 5 minutes to eat food, it means they're not chewing their food, or it means they're eating just that much food and then kind of gulping down their food. That food is going to either not be digested, or that's going to become armor, or that's going to just stay there and give them a lot of trouble. Now, you need to help them understand the importance of sitting at a place, and not rushing with the food, spending a little bit of time concentrating on the food when they eat. Only then will that food nourish your body, and only then will that food be digested. So again, we give a lot of importance to whether the food is raw or cooked. So raw food is basically not good for vata people, especially in winter. It kind of increases that vata imbalance, and it leads to a lot of bloating, and it leads to a lot of issues. So the thing is, there are people who actually eat just salads, to lose weight, to stay healthier. These salads are not going to help you, because especially for a person who is vata, because these salads are going to they're just going to increase the gas, they're going to increase the vata, and it's going to take forever to digest, right? So it's going to further impair your agni. So it is important to explain the need to cook vegetables, especially your green leafy vegetables. um, this is something that's so common in the US, where people eat raw spinach. No, don't eat your spinach raw. It will not digest. You have to cook your spinach. There are vegetables that you can eat raw. There are vegetables that that need to be cooked. If you're making a salad, there are certain things that you can probably just cook half and put in, but your greens need to be cooked. Only then will it digest. Otherwise, it's just going to pass out of your system without digesting, and it can even lead to various other problems. Another important thing is, if your food is conventionally grown, if your vegetables are conventionally grown, which means there is a fair amount of insecticides and herbicides that are added to your vegetables or your fruits, you need to ensure that you the reason you cook them is because that kind of takes away a little bit of the harmful effect that is there in the vegetable, or so when you have it raw, you're kind of consuming whatever was sprayed on it. So you need to ensure it's washed really well. If possible, de-skin the vegetables, because that's just a little more safer than consuming the skin also, because you have absolutely no idea what has gone on it and in it, right? Again, how your food is grown, how your food is prepared, all that can affect you. How the food is cooked, like I was telling you, when your food is made with love, when your food is served with love, that has immense positivity to your body, and that increases that prana that is there in that particular food. Now, cooking your food on fire is much more beneficial than using the microwave to make your food. The heat from your microwave is not the most healthiest of forms of cooking. So that is another important thing that you need to keep in mind. So now, if you have clients who don't cook that often, or they don't have time to cook, or they don't know to cook, the first thing would be to try and um, talk them into making simple things at home. Because if you make food fresh, that by itself would increase the prana, and that by itself would be very beneficial to the body. So you can give them very easy, simple recipes that they can follow with ingredients that would help them, and that would help uh, balance out their doshas. You might have to talk a little bit, you might have to talk them into cooking, and talk them into taking time, because that is very important. If you don't take care of your health, then I believe if you don't spend time and money taking care of your health, then there's no point working and bringing all the money in the world, because at the end of the day, you're going to finally end up spending it on medication. So you'd rather spend money on food, good food, spend time cooking that food and pamper yourself rather than falling sick and having to um, live on medication. So visit either Indian stores or visit stores that have organic produce or different kinds of produce, and this is something that would help every person, every Ayurvedic physician in any part of the world. Go to a local produce. Go to, if you have a farmer's market near you, go there. If you have organic stores near you, go there. Look at the produce, look at what all is available, and do your research on that food. So you know what you can recommend, you know what different kinds of things are available. In fact, you must also go to stores and check out the counters that have frozen food, canned food, and different kinds of unhealthy food. You must check that out also, because those are things that you have to tell your client to avoid having. So it is important for you to know what exactly is available at local stores next to your place, and in that, wherever your clients are, it is important to know what is locally available to them. And based, see, everybody can't afford organic food. Different clients will have different things that they follow and different things that they eat. You must have a general idea about the whole thing, so it becomes easier for you to make your recommendations, right? So these are the things that we've seen there are three doshas, how these doshas affect your how food affects these three doshas, and how one thing might be good for the dosha but that might not be good for another dosha. And then we talked about the different rasas and how that increases the doshas, and how an imbalance can be created because of a rasa, and how an imbalance can be balanced with the help of rasas. And then we saw how Western nutrition, the idea is, that it's the same food, the same effect that it has on everybody, and how in Ayurveda we give a lot of importance to customizing food based on the particular client, based on their needs, and how we take everything into account, from the rasas to the elements to the doshas to the client to the location to the weather to the prana of the food, to how it helps increase your ojas, to the place that the person is from, to the eating habits, to their mental the mentality, and all of that comes into consideration when we suggest an Ayurvedic diet for a client, right? So this is a basic introduction to Ayurveda. This is a basic introduction to Ayurvedic nutrition. Do you guys have any doubts in anything that we've done today? Any doubts? Any questions that you have? Did anything not make sense to you? Did anything? No? Yeah, that's true. Yes. Any question? Yes. So you need to have something that will see. So for vata and pitta, you have rasas that are, that you can choose, that will help to. Let me take you to the rasas. So look at the rasas that are beneficial for vata. It is sweet, sour, and salty. And rasas that are beneficial for pitta are sweet, bitter, and astringent. So you have a common rasa, which is the sweet rasa, right? So that would be the rasa that would you have to use that more in your food. Now, having said that, No, you don't completely avoid them. See, as long as you don't have a condition where your vata is aggravated or your pitta is aggravated, just based on your prakriti, the idea is to ensure that you don't aggravate a particular dosha by having too much of that rasa, but you don't avoid that rasa completely, right? Yeah. So you have to have a balanced diet. You need to have all your you need to have all your rasas in your food, but just ensure that you don't have too much of these rasas that increase. Yes, they do. So so everything, that all these rasas that we're talking about are natural rasas that are present in the food and not added flavors, right? But then there are certain rasas, like for instance, if you look at a food like gooseberry, right? So this gooseberry has it is more of a sour rasa, but along with that it also has a sweet rasa, it also has a bitter rasa, it also has an astringent rasa. So there are five rasas that are there in gooseberry. So there are certain foods that have a combination of these rasas, and then there are certain food, so then there are certain foods that would have just one predominant rasa and the other rasas are not even felt. So yes, different foods will have a different combination. So what we've done today is just a very basic thing, where you have an idea about what these rasas do and so on. As we learn more, we'll talk about different kinds of food and about how certain things are beneficial and certain things aren't and so on, right? All right, guys. Thank you so much. I think you have the next class, so I don't want. Sorry. Onions aren't sweet. Onions are very pungent.